Welcome to my channel. If you enjoy this story, don't forget to subscribe and like. The hollow drift was a scar in the void, a derelict station orbiting the husk of a dead star, its name whispered like a curse across the galactic rim. Once a beacon of trade and diplomacy, it now hung in the black like a forgotten relic, its outer hull pocked with meteor strikes and patched with scavenged alloy. The inner rings spun lazily, their gravity generators coughing out uneven pulses, while the core, a labyrinth of rusted corridors and flickering neon, churned with the kind of commerce no one admitted to in polite company. This was where the galaxy dumped its refuse: broken tech, broken dreams, and broken lives. Elias Kane moved through the lower decks like a shadow, his boots scuffing against the pitted deck plating. The air was thick with the tang of recycled ozone and the faint, acrid bite of coolant leaks. He kept his hood low, his augments, retinal implants and a neural dampener, humming faintly in his skull to block the psychic static that clung to this place like damp rot. Elias wasn't supposed to be here. No one with a shred of self-preservation came to the hollow drift willingly, not unless they were running from something worse. Or chasing something they couldn't name. He'd been a medic once, back when the Coalition still pretended to care about the outer colonies. He'd stitched wounds, reset bones, and pulled soldiers from the edge of madness after battles with the Vren, a hive-mind species that chewed through human fleets like locusts through a field. But that was before the fracture, before the Coalition abandoned the Rim worlds to corporate scavengers and left men like Elias to fend for themselves. Now, he was just a drifter, a ghost with a medkit and a knack for hearing what others couldn't: thoughts, fears, the faint psychic echoes of pain that lingered in places like this. The drift's underbelly pulsed with noise, the hiss of steam vents, the low hum of black market neurorigs, the murmur of deals struck in shadowed corners. Elias turned down a narrow corridor, its walls lined with flickering hollow ads for gene mods and cheap stims. He hadn't meant to come this far into the barter pits, where flesh was traded as easily as scrap. But something pulled him, a faint tremor at the base of his skull, like a finger brushing the strings of an untuned guitar. It wasn't his augment glitching. It was something alive. The barter pits were a maze of cages and stalls, lit by stuttering argon lamps that cast long, jagged shadows. Most of the cages were empty now, the day's auctions long over. Traders packed up their wares, alien artifacts, stolen tech, and the occasional sentient being no one would miss. Elias kept his eyes forward, his hands in his pockets, fingers brushing the grip of a concealed pulse knife. He wasn't here to start trouble. He wasn't sure why he was here at all. Then he felt it again, a psychic pulse, sharp and desperate, like a scream cut off mid-breath. It came from a cage at the far end of the pit, tucked behind a pile of discarded coolant drums. The tag above it flickered: Lot 472, Zythurian origin, unverified. Unsold. Scheduled for reclamation. The word reclamation twisted in Elias's gut. It was a polite term for disposal, for stripping a body down to its base elements, and selling what was left. He stepped closer, his breath fogging in the chilly air. Two figures sat inside the cage, their forms barely visible under the dim light. One was curled against the back wall, knees drawn tight to her chest, her skin a deep, shimmering indigo that seemed to drink the light rather than reflect it. Her hair, long and silver, spilled across her shoulders like liquid moonlight, and her eyes, when they flicked up briefly, were wide, pale, and unblinking, like twin moons in a storm. She didn't move, didn't speak, just sat there, folded into herself as if the world were too heavy to bear. The other figure stood in front of her, protective, unyielding. She was taller, leaner, her skin a mottled crimson streaked with black, like embers smoldering under ash. Her hair was a tangle of dark braids, knotted with bits of metal and bone, and her eyes, narrow, gold-flecked, and fierce, locked onto Elias the moment he came into view. She shifted her stance, 1 foot forward, shoulders squared, not aggressive but ready, like a blade balanced on its edge. The air around her crackled with something unspoken, a psychic hum that made Elias's dampener buzz in warning. He stopped a few paces from the cage, hands raised slowly, palms open. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said, his voice low, steady, the kind he'd used to calm soldiers waking from nightmares of Vrenhide ships. The Crimson Woman didn't blink. "You're late for the auction," she said, her voice sharp, accented with a cadence that felt like wind over jagged stone. "Nothing left to buy." Elias glanced at the flickering tag above the cage. "Why didn't anyone bid?" he asked, careful to keep his tone neutral. The woman's lips curled into a bitter smile. "Her?" She nodded toward the indigo-skinned woman behind her. "Too fragile." "Me?" "Too much trouble." Her eyes narrowed, daring him to argue. Elias didn't. He felt the weight of their minds brushing against his, hers like a storm, all sharp edges and coiled rage, the others like a faint, trembling note, barely holding together. "She's not fragile," Elias said softly, meeting the Crimson Woman's gaze. "She's just quiet." The woman's expression didn't soften, but something shifted in her eyes, a flicker of curiosity, maybe, or recognition. "And you're what?" she asked. "Another vulture sniffing for scraps? Or some savior with a bleeding heart?" "Neither," Elias said. "I'm just someone who knows what it's like to be left behind." He took a step closer, slow, deliberate, letting them see his hands, empty of threat. "I can get you out. Both of you. There's a service tunnel 1 level up, leads to a smuggler's dock. I've got contacts. No one will stop us." The Crimson Woman studied him, her gaze slicing through him like a blade. "You smell like a medic," she said, her voice low, almost a growl. "But you feel like something else. Like someone who's seen too much, and still thinks he can fix it." Elias didn't flinch. "I don't fix people," he said. "I just give them a chance to breathe." The indigo woman stirred, her head lifting slightly, silver hair falling away from her face. Her eyes met his for the first time, and Elias felt a jolt, not pain, but something deeper, like a memory he hadn't lived. Her mind brushed his, soft as a whisper, carrying fragments of grief and starlight. She didn't speak, but her presence was enough to make the air feel heavier, more alive. "You're not afraid," the Crimson Woman said, not a question but a statement. "Most humans would be." Elias shrugged, a small, tired gesture. "I've seen worse. And I've felt worse." He nodded toward the cage's lock, a crude biometric scanner blinking red. "I can bypass that. But you have to decide now." The Crimson Woman hesitated, her hand hovering near the bars, fingers twitching like she was weighing the cost of trust. Then, slowly, she stepped aside, not fully, just enough to let him approach. "If you're lying," she said, "I'll make sure you regret it." Elias nodded, pulling a small multi-tool from his coat. "Fair enough." The lock hissed as he worked, its circuits sparking under his touch. The cage door slid open with a groan, and the Crimson Woman moved first, helping her companion to her feet. The Indigo Woman stood unsteadily, her movements fragile but deliberate, like someone relearning how to exist. Elias stepped back, giving them space, his eyes scanning the shadows for movement. The pit was quiet, but not empty. He could feel eyes watching, lenses flickering in the dark. "This way," he said, leading them toward a service hatch at the end of the corridor. The Crimson Woman kept her companion close, one arm steadying her, her other hand free, ready for a fight. Elias didn't need to look back to know she was tracking his every move. The hatch opened with a low whine, revealing a narrow tunnel lit by flickering maintenance strips. The air inside was colder, sharper, smelling of rust and forgotten promises. They moved quickly, silently, the only sound their boots against the metal grate. Elias's dampener buzzed again, picking up stray psychic signals, fear, anger, desperation, leaking from the station's lower levels. The drift was alive in its own way, a beast that fed on the misery it housed. He pushed the thought aside, focusing on the path ahead. The smuggler's dock was close, but every step felt like a gamble. The Indigo Woman stumbled, her breath catching. The Crimson Woman caught her, murmuring something too soft for Elias to hear. He slowed, glancing back. "You okay?" he asked, keeping his voice low. The Indigo Woman nodded, her eyes meeting his again, that same strange weight in her gaze. She doesn't talk much, the Crimson Woman said. But she hears everything. Elias nodded, turning back to the tunnel. I'm Elias, he said, not looking at them. You don't have to tell me your names. The Crimson Woman was quiet for a moment, then said, Caliph. A pause, then softer. She's Vera. Elias didn't press for more. Names were currency in a place like this, and they'd already given him more than most would. The tunnel opened into a wider chamber, a forgotten maintenance bay cluttered with discarded crates and humming power conduits. The smuggler's dock was just beyond, a shadowed platform where a patched-up shuttle waited, its hull scarred but functional. Elias's contact, a wiry pilot named Joran, leaned against the shuttle's ramp, chewing on a stim stick. He straightened when he saw them, his eyes narrowing at Caliph and Vera. You didn't say you were bringing company, Joran said, his voice clipped, wary. Elias stepped forward, blocking his view of the women. Didn't know I was until an hour ago. Can you get us out? Joran's gaze flicked to Caliph, then Vera, lingering on her shimmering indigo skin. Depends. They clean? Clean enough, Elias said, his tone flat but firm. No trackers, no implants. I checked. It was a lie. He hadn't had time to scan them properly, but Joran didn't need to know that. The pilot grunted, tossing his stim stick to the ground. Fine. But you owe me double for this. Coalition's got drones sniffing around the outer rings. If we're caught, we won't be, Elias cut in. He turned to Caliph and Vera. Get inside. Stay low. Caliph didn't move at first, her eyes locked on Joran, reading him like a predator sizing up prey. Vera's hand brushed hers, a silent reassurance, and Caliph nodded, guiding her toward the shuttle. Elias followed, his senses on edge, the psychic hum in the air growing louder, sharper. Inside the shuttle, the air was stale, the seats patched with duct tape and hope. Caliph settled Vera in a corner, away from the viewport, her body a shield between her companion and the world. Elias took a seat near the cockpit, watching Joran run pre-flight checks with practiced ease. The shuttle's engines groaned to life, a low rumble that vibrated through the hull. As they lifted off, the hollow drift receded behind them, its jagged silhouette swallowed by the void. Elias exhaled, the tension in his chest easing slightly. But the relief was short-lived. A new signal pulsed through his dampener, a faint, invasive tickle, like a needle probing the edge of his mind. It wasn't Caliph or Vera. It was something else, something tracking them. Joran, Elias said, his voice low. We've got a tail. The pilot swore, his fingers flying over the controls. Coalition? He asked. Elias shook his head, his augments humming as he tried to isolate the signal. Not coalition. Something private. Corporate, maybe. Caliph's head snapped up, her eyes narrowing. Vrentech, she said, her voice ablade. They're not done with us. Elias turned to her, his pulse quickening. Vrentech? You mean the hive mind? Caliph's jaw tightened. Not the hive. The scavengers who weaponized their scraps. They tagged us before the auction. Neural trackers embedded deep. You can't feel them unless they're active. Vera's hand tightened on Caliph's arm, her eyes wide, haunted. Elias cursed under his breath. Vrentech was a shadow corporation, a syndicate that harvested the psychic remnants of the Vren's defeated hive minds and turned them into weapons, mind breakers, neural overrides, tools to control or destroy. If they were after Caliph and Vera, it wasn't just about reclaiming property. It was about what their minds could do. The shuttle lurched as Joran pushed the engines to their limit, weaving through the debris field around the drift. Hold on, he muttered, his voice tight. Elias braced himself, his hand on the pulse knife, his mind racing. The signal was growing stronger, closing in. He glanced at Caliph, her crimson skin gleaming in the dim light, her body coiled like a spring. Vera was still, her gaze distant, but her mind pulsed with that same fragile note he'd felt in the cage. Can you block it? Elias asked Caliph. The tracker? She shook her head. Not without frying our own minds. It's woven into our neural lattice. Only way to stop it is to overload the source. Elias nodded, his mind already working through options. Joran, get us to the edge of the sector. There's an old relay station out there, abandoned. If we can draw them in, we might be able to short their tech. Joran didn't argue, his hands steady on the controls. The shuttle banked hard, dodging a chunk of floating wreckage. Elias turned to Calith and Vera. You two stay with me. Whatever happens, we don't split up. Calith's eyes met his, a flicker of something, trust, maybe, or just shared desperation. You're not what I expected, she said, her voice softer now, almost curious. Elias gave her a tired smile. Good. I'm not trying to be. Vera's hand brushed his, her touch cool, fleeting, but deliberate. You see us, she whispered, her voice like a faint chime in the dark. Elias's chest tightened. He didn't know what she meant, not fully, but he felt it, a connection, raw and unformed, tying them together in this moment. The relay station loomed ahead, a skeletal structure of twisted metal and dead consoles, its silhouette stark against the starfield. Joran brought the shuttle in low, landing on a crumbling platform. You've got 10 minutes, he said, his voice clipped. After that, I'm gone, favors or not. Elias nodded, already moving toward the hatch. Stay here, he told Joran. We'll be back. The station's interior was a tomb, its air stale and heavy with dust. Elias led the way, his augment scanning for threats. Calith and Vera followed, their steps silent, their minds a faint hum in his perception. The psychic signal was stronger now, a relentless pulse that made his dampener whine. They're close, he said, his voice low. We need to find the main relay. The relay chamber was a cavern of ancient tech, its walls lined with blinking consoles and tangled cables. Elias knelt by the central unit, his multitool sparking as he pried open a panel. If we can overload the station's old broadcast array, it might fry their trackers without touching you, he said, glancing at Calith. She nodded, her eyes scanning the shadows. Do it fast, she said. They don't wait. Vera stood near the entrance, her indigo skin glowing faintly in the dark. Her hands were clasped together, her body still, but her mind was alive, pulsing with something Elias couldn't quite read, fear, yes, but also resolve, like a star burning steady in a storm. He worked quickly, rerouting power through the console, his fingers steady despite the growing pressure in his skull. The first sign of trouble was a low hum, not mechanical but psychic, a wave of static that made Elias's augment scream. Kayla spun, her braids whipping as she faced the entrance. They're here, she said, her voice a growl. Vera stepped forward, her eyes narrowing, her hands glowing faintly with a light Elias hadn't seen before. 3 figures emerged from the shadows, their forms sleek and armored, their faces hidden behind visors that glowed with Vrentech runes. The leader, unmasked, was a woman with pale, almost translucent skin, her eyes a cold, synthetic blue. You've made this harder than it needed to be, she said, her voice smooth, clinical. Return the assets, and we'll let you walk. Elias stood, his pulse knife humming in his hand. They're not assets, he said, his voice steady. They're people. The woman's lips twitched, a faint, humorless smile. People don't carry hive mind fragments in their neural lattice. They're weapons. And they belong to us. Kayla stepped forward, her body radiating defiance. Try taking us, she said, her voice low, dangerous. Vera's glow intensified, her hands trembling but steady, her mind pulsing with a frequency that made the air hum. Elias felt it, a resonance, raw and powerful, like a song he'd never heard but always known. The fight was fast, brutal. The Vrentech agents moved with mechanical precision, their weapons spitting arcs of neural disrupting energy. Calith was a blur, dodging and striking with a grace that belied her ferocity, her braids snapping like whips. Vera didn't fight, she sang, a low, resonant hum that rippled through the air, disrupting the agent's tech. Elias ducked and weaved, his pulse knife cutting through armor, his augment screaming as he blocked psychic attacks. The leader fell last, her visor cracked, her eyes wide with shock as Vera's song shattered her neural link. The chamber fell silent, the air thick with the smell of burnt circuits and blood. Elias panted, his knife still in hand, his body aching but alive. Kayla stood over the leader's body, her chest heaving, her eyes blazing. Vera sank to her knees, her glow fading, her breath ragged. "We need to move," Elias said, his voice hoarse. He helped Vera to her feet, her hand warm in his, her eyes meeting his with a trust that made his chest ache. Caliph nodded, her expression unreadable but steady. They ran, the station's corridors blurring past, the psychic signal fading as the relay array overloaded behind them. Back in the shuttle, Joran didn't ask questions. He just gunned the engines, the craft lurching into the void. Elias sat with Caliph and Vera, their breaths sinking in the quiet. The hollow drift was gone, a speck in the distance, but the weight of what they'd done lingered. They'd escaped, but they weren't free, not yet. "Why us?" Caliph asked, her voice low, almost accusing. Elias looked at her, then at Vera, whose eyes were still fixed on the stars. "Because I saw you," he said. "And I couldn't look away." Vera's hand brushed his again, her touch a silent promise. Caliph didn't speak, but her shoulder leaned slightly toward his, a gesture small but heavy with meaning. The shuttle drifted toward the edge of the sector, toward a colony Joran swore was safe, a place where broken things could grow again. Elias didn't know if he believed it, but for the first time in years, he wanted to. The stars outside were cold, endless, but inside the shuttle, there was warmth, fragile but real. And that, in a galaxy that chewed up hope and spat it out, was enough to keep going. The colony was called Verdant's Rest, a misnomer if Elias Kane had ever heard one. Tucked into the shadow of a gas giant's rings, it was less a sanctuary than a patchwork of hope and desperation, a domed city carved into the side of a jagged moon. Its air was heavy with the scent of alien lichen and recycled oxygen, its streets a tangle of prefab shelters and bioluminescent vines that pulsed like veins under the dome's artificial sky. The settlers here were drifters like Elias, exiles, renegades, and survivors who'd fled the galaxy's sharper edges. It was a place to disappear, but not to forget. Elias leaned against the wall of their small habitat, a cramped unit at the edge of the dome, its windows fogged with condensation. His augments hummed faintly, filtering the low-grade psychic static that lingered even here, a residue of the colony's makeshift neurogrid. Caliph sat cross-legged on the floor, her crimson skin catching the dim glow of a lantern, her braids loose and spilling over her shoulders. She was sharpening a shard of metal, some scavenged piece of the shuttle, her movements precise, deliberate, like a ritual to keep her hands steady. Vera was curled on a cot nearby, her indigo skin shimmering faintly, her silver hair fanned across a thin pillow. She wasn't asleep, not quite. Her eyes were half open, staring at the ceiling as if tracing constellations no one else could see. 3 days had passed since they'd escaped the hollow drift, 3 days of uneasy quiet. Joran had dropped them here, muttering about debts and disappearing into the void with his shuttle. Elias had paid him with the last of his credits and a promise of future favors, a currency he wasn't sure he could deliver. Verdant's Rest was safe, for now, no Vrentex signals, no coalition drones, but safety was a fragile thing, a breath held too long. Elias felt it in his bones, in the faint buzz of his dampener, in the way Calith's eyes never stopped scanning the room. "You're waiting for something," Calith said, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. She didn't look up from her sharpening, but her gold-flecked eyes flicked toward him, sharp and unyielding. Elias met her gaze, his hands still in his coat pockets, fingers brushing the pulse knife he hadn't put down since the drift. "So are you," he said, his tone even, not accusing. "You haven't slept since we got here." Calith's lips twitched, not quite a smile. "Sleep's for people who trust the ground under them." She set the metal shard aside, her hands resting on her knees, her body still coiled, ready to spring. "This place, it's too quiet. Too clean. It doesn't feel right." Elias nodded, understanding her wariness. Verdant's Rest was a haven, but it was built on the bones of older failures, a colony that had survived by staying small, unnoticed. Places like this didn't last long when the galaxy came knocking. Vera stirred, her voice soft, almost a whisper. "It's not the place," she said, her eyes still fixed on the ceiling. "It's us. We're carrying the noise." Elias turned to her, his chest tightening at the weight in her words. Her mind brushed his, a faint, trembling note, like a string plucked too softly to resonate. "What kind of noise?" he asked, crouching near her cot, careful to keep his distance. Vera's eyes met his, pale and luminous, like starlight trapped in glass. "The kind that calls them," she said. "The Vrentek. They're not just tracking us. They're listening. Our minds, they're fragments of something bigger. Something they want to control." Kalitha's head snapped up, her hand tightening on the metal shard. "You didn't tell me that," she said, her voice low, dangerous. Vera's gaze didn't waver. "I didn't know how. Not until now." Elias's augments buzzed, a faint warning of psychic activity, stronger than before. He stood, his eyes scanning the room, though he knew the threat wasn't physical, not yet. "They're still after you," he said, more to himself than to them. "The trackers we fried at the relay station, they weren't the only ones, were they?" Vera shook her head, her silver hair shifting like liquid. "They're layered. Deep. Like roots in stone. We can't cut them out without losing ourselves." Kayla stood, her movements fluid, predatory. "Then we fight," she said, her voice a growl. "We find their source and burn it down." Elias raised a hand, not to stop her but to slow her. "We don't know where they are. Or how many. If we go charging in, we're dead." Kalitha's eyes narrowed, but she didn't argue. She trusted his judgment, even if she didn't like it. That trust, fragile as it was, felt like a victory. The habitat's comm panel chirped, a low, insistent sound that made them all freeze. Elias crossed the room, his pulse quickening, and keyed the display. A grainy hollow flickered to life, showing a woman with sharp features and eyes like polished obsidian. Her name was Mira, a fixer who ran Verdant's Rest's underground network. Elias had dealt with her before, trading medical supplies for information. Her voice was clipped urgent. "Kane, you've got trouble. Vrentek's ships hit the outer perimeter an hour ago. They're sweeping the sector, and they're not subtle." Elias's stomach dropped. "How close?" he asked. Myra's lips pressed into a thin line. "Close enough that you need to move. Now. I've got a safe house on the far side of the dome, but it's not cheap." Elias glanced at Kalith and Vera, their faces tense but resolute. "We'll pay," he said. "Get us coordinates." Mira nodded, the hollow flickering out. Kalith was already moving, gathering their sparse belongings, a medkit, a few nutrient packs, the metal shard she'd been sharpening. Vera stood, her movements slow but steady, her eyes meeting Elias's. "They'll find us," she said, her voice calm, almost resigned. "Not if we're faster," Elias replied, forcing a confidence he didn't fully feel. He led them out of the habitat, into the narrow streets of Verdant's Rest, where the bioluminescent vines cast eerie shadows across the ground. The domed city was alive with quiet tension, settlers moving quickly, heads down, as if sensing the storm on the horizon. Elias kept Kalith and Vera close, his augments scanning for threats. The air was thick with the hum of the colony's neural grid, a low-grade psychic network that linked the settlers' implants. It was meant to foster community, but to Elias, it felt like a net, waiting to catch the unwary. The safe house was a low, unmarked structure tucked behind a cluster of hydroponic tanks. Mira met them at the door, her eyes scanning the street before ushering them inside. The interior was sparse, a single room with a cot, a console, and a small cache of supplies. "You've got 48 hours," Mira said, her voice low. "After that, you're on your own." Elias nodded, handing her a data chip with the last of his credits. "Thanks," he said. Mira didn't smile. "Don't thank me yet," she said and was gone. Inside, the air was cooler, the walls lined with sound-dampening panels that muted the colony's hum. Elias set up a portable scanner, its faint beat the only sound in the room. Caliph paced, her braids swaying with each step, her eyes never leaving the door. Vera sat on the cot, her hands clasped, her glow dim but steady. "We can't keep running," she said, her voice soft but firm. "They'll always find us." Elias crouched beside her, his augments quiet for the first time in hours. "Then we need a plan," he said. "Something better than running." Kayla stopped pacing, her eyes narrowing. "You heard her. The trackers are in us. We can't cut them out. What's left?" Elias hesitated, then said, "We turn their tech against them. If their trackers are listening, we make them hear something they don't expect." Vera's eyes widened, a flicker of understanding passing through them. "You mean a trap?" she said. Elias nodded. "We use the colony's neural grid. Amplify your signals, make them think you're somewhere else. Draw them into a dead zone and hit them where they're weak." Kalitha's lips curled into a grim smile. "I like it," she said. "But it's risky. If they get close, they'll burn through our minds before we can blink." "Then we don't let them get close," Elias said. He pulled up a schematic of the colony on the console, highlighting a disused mining tunnel at the edge of the dome. "This is our ground. Narrow, defensible, and far from the main grid. If we can lure them there, we can overload their tech without touching the colony's systems." Vera's hand brushed his, her touch cool but steady. "You're risking everything for us," she said. "Why?" Elias met her gaze, his throat tight. "Because I know what it's like to be hunted," he said. "And because you're worth it." Kayla snorted, but there was no malice in it. "You're soft, Kane," she said, but her eyes held a warmth he hadn't seen before. Vera smiled, faint but real, and for a moment, the room felt less like a cage and more like a home. The plan came together quickly. Elias hacked into the colony's neural grid, using his augments to boost Caliph and Vera's psychic signatures, broadcasting a false trail to the mining tunnel. Vera's resonance was key. Her ability to hum a frequency that disrupted Vrentech made her both a target and a weapon. Kalitha's role was simpler. She'd be the bait, her rage a beacon to draw the hunters in. Elias would handle the tech, rigging the tunnel with an electromagnetic pulse to fry the trackers. They moved under cover of the dome's artificial night, the vines glowing softly overhead. The mining tunnel was a dark, jagged scar in the moon's crust, its walls lined with abandoned equipment and the faint hum of old power conduits. Elias set up the EMP device, its components scavenged from the safehouse's cache. Kayla stood at the tunnel's mouth, her body tense, her eyes scanning the darkness. Vera stayed close, her glow dimmed to avoid detection, her hands trembling but steady. The Vrentech ships arrived silently, their sleek forms cutting through the gas giant's rings like sharks through water. Elias's augment screamed, the psychic signal overwhelming now, a relentless pulse that made his head ache. "They're here," he said, his voice low. Caliph nodded, her hand tightening on the metal shard. "Let them come," she said, her voice a growl. The first agents appeared at the tunnel's entrance, their armor gleaming with Vrentech runes, their movements precise, almost mechanical. The leader was the same woman from the relay station, her translucent skin glowing faintly in the dark, her eyes cold and unyielding. "You can't run forever," she said, her voice smooth, almost amused. "The hive fragments in your minds belong to us. Hand them over, and we'll make this quick." Kayla stepped forward, her crimson skin blazing in the dim light. "You want fragments?" she said, her voice low, dangerous. "Come take them." Vera's hum began, a soft, resonant note that rippled through the air, disrupting the agent's tech. Their visors flickered, their movements stuttering as the neural link faltered. Elias triggered the EMP, a pulse of energy that lit up the tunnel like a dying star. The agents staggered, their armor sparking, their weapons falling silent. Caliph moved like a storm, her shards slicing through armor, her rage a palpable force. Vera's hum grew louder, a song of defiance that shattered the agents' neural links, leaving them writhing on the ground. The leader fell last, her eyes wide with shock, her body collapsing as the EMP burned through her implants. The tunnel fell silent, the air thick with the smell of ozone and blood. Elias panted, his augments quiet for the first time in hours. Kayla stood over the leader's body, her chest heaving, her eyes blazing. Vera sank to her knees, her glow fading, her breath ragged but steady. "It's over," she whispered, her voice trembling with relief. But Elias knew better. The EMP had fried the trackers, but Vrentech wasn't done. They'd come again, stronger, smarter. He helped Vera to her feet, her hand warm in his, her eyes meeting his with a trust that made his chest ache. Kayla joined them, her expression unreadable but steady. "We need to move," she said, her voice low. "This isn't the end." They returned to the safe house, the colony streets quiet now, the vines glowing softly overhead. Elias sat with Caliph and Vera, their breaths sinking in the dim light. The weight of what they'd done lingered, a reminder that freedom was a fight, not a gift. But there was something else too, a warmth, fragile but real, growing between them. Vera reached for Elias's hand, her touch cool but deliberate. "You didn't leave us," she said, her voice soft, almost a question. Elias shook his head. "I won't," he said, his voice steady. Calith's shoulder brushed his, a gesture small but heavy with meaning. "You're still soft, Kane," she said, but her eyes held a warmth that belied her words. The comm panel chirped again, Myra's voice crackling through. "Kane, you've got a bigger problem. Vrentech is not just after your friends. They're after the colony. They think you've got something they need, a key to the hive mind's core." Elias's stomach dropped. The fight wasn't over. It was just beginning. The dome of Verdant's Rest flickered under the weight of an artificial dawn, its bioluminescent vines pulsing erratically, as if the colony's heart sensed the storm breaking over it. Elias Kane stood at the safe house's viewport, his augments screaming with psychic static, a cacophony of fear and defiance leaking from the colony's neural grid. Outside, the gas giant's rings cast jagged shadows across the moon's surface, a reminder of the vast, uncaring universe that waited to swallow them whole. But inside this cramped room, with Caliph and Vera by his side, Elias felt something he hadn't in years: purpose. Myra's warning hung in the air like smoke. Vrentech wasn't just hunting Caliph and Vera. They believed the colony harbored a key to the Vren hive mind's core, a psychic nexus that could control or destroy entire systems. Elias didn't know if it was true, but the fragments in Caliph and Vera's minds, the way their thoughts hummed with a resonance beyond human understanding, made it plausible. And that made Verdant's Rest a target, a speck of defiance in the path of a corporate juggernaut. Caliph paced the room, her crimson skin catching the lantern's glow, her braids knotted tightly now, ready for war. "We can't fight them all," she said, her voice low, not defeated but pragmatic. Elias turned from the viewport, his pulse knife humming faintly in his hand. "We don't have to fight them all," he said. "We just have to break their chain. Cut off their link to the hive fragments, and they've got nothing." Vera sat on the cot, her indigo skin shimmering, her silver hair framing a face that held both fragility and resolve. Her eyes met Elias's, steady, unblinking. "It's in me," she said, her voice soft but clear, like a bell ringing in the dark. "The key. I can feel it now. A song buried deep. If I sing it, they'll come for me. All of them." Kayla stopped pacing, her hand tightening on the metal shard she'd carried since the drift. "No," she said, her voice a growl. "You're not bait. Not again." Elias crouched beside Vera, his augments quiet, letting her presence fill the space between them. "You don't have to do this," he said. "We'll find another way." Vera's hand brushed his, her touch cool but deliberate, a silent anchor. "There is no other way," she said. "The song is mine to sing. But I need you both to keep me whole." Her eyes flicked to Caliph, a plea wrapped in trust. Calith's jaw tightened, but she nodded, a silent vow. The plan was desperate, reckless, but it was all they had. Vera would amplify her psychic resonance, broadcasting the hive mind's song through the colony's neural grid, drawing Vrenteka's forces to a single point. Elias and Kalith would lead a small group of settlers, those willing to fight, to ambush the invaders, using the colony's terrain to their advantage. If they could disrupt Vrenteka's neural links, Vera's song could overload their systems, burning out the hive fragments and ending the threat. If they failed, Verdant's Rest would be a graveyard. Mira rallied the settlers, her voice sharp and commanding over the calms. "This is our home," she said, her words crackling through the dome. "We've bled for it, died for it. Now we fight for it." The response was uneven. Some fled to the shelters, others took up arms, scavenged rifles and improvised explosives clutched in trembling hands. Elias saw fear in their eyes, but also defiance, the kind that had kept humanity alive against the galaxy's worst. This was HFY, raw and unpolished, a middle finger to the void. They chose the colony's central reactor as their battleground, a cavernous chamber where the dome's power core thrummed like a heartbeat. Its narrow access points and dense machinery made it defensible, a choke point where numbers meant less than strategy. Elias rigged traps, EMP charges, coolant leaks, anything to slow Vrenteka's advance. Kalith scouted the perimeter, her movements silent, predatory, her shard glinting in the reactor's glow. Vera stood at the core's edge, her hands clasped, her glow intensifying as she prepared to sing. The attack came at dusk, the dome's lights dimming as Vrentek's ships breached the outer defenses. Their drones swarmed the streets, sleek and merciless, their weapons spitting arcs of neural-disrupting energy. The settlers fought back, their rifles barking, their explosives lighting up the dark. Elias moved through the chaos, his pulse knife a blur, his augments screaming as he blocked psychic assaults. Kalith was a storm, her shards slicing through drones, her rage a beacon in the fray. Vera's song began, a low, resonant hum that rippled through the neural grid, its frequency piercing the air like a blade. Elias felt it in his chest, a vibration that was both beautiful and terrifying, like standing at the edge of a star. The Vrentek agents faltered, their visors flickering, their movements stuttering as the song disrupted their links. But they kept coming, driven by a cold, mechanical will, their leader, the translucent-skinned woman from before, at their head. She moved like a specter, her eyes glowing with synthetic fire, her voice cutting through the chaos. "You can't stop the hive," she said, her words aimed at Vera. "Its song is eternal. You're just a vessel." Vera didn't flinch, her song growing louder, more complex, weaving threads of defiance and grief into a tapestry that shook the reactor's walls. Elias fought his way to her side, his knife carving through an agent's armor, his body shielding her from the onslaught. Kalith faced the leader, their clash a dance of fury and precision. The shard met a neural blade, sparks flying, their movements a blur. "You don't own her," Kalith snarled, her voice raw, her crimson skin blazing. The leader smiled, cold and unyielding. "She was never yours to keep," she said, her blade grazing Kalith's arm, drawing blood that glistened like embers. The settlers held the line, their courage a fragile but unbreakable thread. Mira fought beside them, her rifle steady, her voice a rallying cry. But the Vrentek agents were relentless, their numbers swelling as more ships landed. Elias's traps slowed them, but not enough. The reactor's core began to overheat, its hum merging with Vera's song, a warning that time was running out. Elias reached Vera, his hand on her shoulder, grounding her as her glow threatened to consume her. "You're doing it," he said, his voice steady despite the chaos. "You're breaking them." Vera's eyes met his, tears streaking her face, her song unwavering. "I'm scared," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Elias squeezed her shoulder, his chest tight. "I'm here," he said. "We're here." Kalith drove the leader back, her shard piercing the woman's armor, her rage a force of nature. The leader staggered, her eyes wide with shock, her neural link faltering. "You can't stop it," she gasped, her voice breaking. "The hive, it's in you all." Kalith's shard found her heart, and the leader fell, her body crumpling like a broken machine. Vera's song reached its crescendo, a wave of psychic energy that surged through the grid, overloading Vrenteka's systems. The agents collapsed, their visors dark, their bodies twitching as the hive fragments burned out. The drones fell from the sky, their circuits fried, their hums silenced. The reactor's core stabilized, its glow softening, a heartbeat returning to normal. The chamber fell quiet, the air thick with the smell of ozone and blood. Elias sank to his knees beside Vera, her glow fading, her body trembling but whole. Kayla joined them, her arm bleeding but her eyes fierce, unbroken. The settlers stood around them, their faces streaked with sweat and ash, their rifles lowered but ready. Mira approached, her expression unreadable. "You did it," she said, her voice low. "But they'll come again." Elias nodded, his breath ragged. "Let them," he said. "We'll be ready." Vera's hand found his, her touch warm now, a promise of something new. Kalitha's shoulder brushed his, her presence a steady flame. They were battered, scarred, but alive, bound by a trust forged in fire. Verdant's rest was still standing, a beacon of defiance in a galaxy that demanded submission. Days later, the colony began to heal. The settlers rebuilt, their voices mingling in the streets, their neural grid humming with shared purpose. Elias, Kalith, and Vera stayed, not as fugitives but as part of something greater. They worked together, Elias tending wounds, Kalith training fighters, Vera teaching the settlers to listen to the stars. The hive fragments were gone, burned out by Vera's song, but their resonance lingered, a reminder of what they'd overcome. One night, under the dome's artificial stars, they sat together, their hands entwined, their breaths sinking in the quiet. "We're not done," Kayla said, her voice soft but firm. "The galaxy's still out there, waiting to break us." Elias nodded, his eyes on the stars. "Then we'll break it first," he said, his voice steady a vow. Vera smiled, her glow soft, her voice a whisper. "We carry the fire," she said, her words echoing in the dark. And in that moment, Elias knew she was right. They were the fire, human, alien, broken, whole, a flame that would burn bright against the void, no matter what came next. This was their story, their defiance, their humanity. Fuck yeah.